right. Good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon from wherever you happen to be joining us. We are pleased to have Shane Evans today with us, the co-founder of GameDriver company and also XR Driver now. That's a new brand that you guys are also pushing. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. A quick
Thanks for having
background,
me.
Shane, for people that may not be familiar with the with yourself, as well
Yeah,
as the actual products and services that you provide.
sure. So I've been in enterprise software for 18 years, actually. Um, Dating myself a bit. I started off as a tester, and I kind of worked my way up into product management, where I led some products for Hewlett Packard and Splunk, and mainly focusing on software quality, so end user experience, making sure things are working correctly. And I started off in more the enterprise space, dealing with things like banking applications and stuff like that, CRM, ERP systems. But in the last 6 years, my focus has shifted to gaming and XR development, where quality has been largely a manual task for the last 30 plus years. Um, I say 30 plus, even though XR is relatively new, because a lot of the technologies are borrowed from gaming. So the game engines, which are used to develop a lot of the experiences that we see in XR, both on mobile devices, headsets, etc. There wasn't a lot of tooling available in that space. So it was basically just give it to your users, your developers to test and see what breaks. But as we're finding now, as these experiences are getting more complex, and they're integrating a lot of things like AR and sensors from various sources, manual testing really isn't sufficient. So GameDriver, the company that I founded, is providing a solution for automated testing that allows your game or XR developer to sort of capture or based on what you expect users are going to do, validate that the outcome is correct, and do so in a way that is consistent and repeatable, and also scalable, because a lot of app developers these days are supporting multiple platforms. You want to build something that's going to support Meta Quest devices and Pico devices or Steam VR, which really just multiplies the need for manual testing across however many platforms you wish to support. So our approach really allows you to kind of codify what you expect to happen, both in positive and negative scenarios, and then be able to repeat that very quickly across any number of platforms.
Awesome, that's great. Really cool. So just a little bit of background about this new channel that I've established over the past 2 months, actually, and the traction is pretty nice. It's actually the purpose of the channel is to help everyone that wants to get into the space, into the domain, to kind of get a better understanding of what to expect, and what the expectations are. And not only that, to also educate them on the tools, the frameworks, and the whole process, right? The whole working pipeline and so forth. So we started the conversation of, like, as far as the industry is concerned, what is your what are your thoughts about how XR is going to impact the industry, specifically in 2025? Now that, as far as adaptation is concerned, like, more people are starting to realize the potential of XR, and due to all of the new hardware form factors and the price drops, how's that in your mind, and from your experience, and from what you have seen over the course of the last few months and last year? What are your thoughts about that? Where are we heading?
Yeah, we see a lot of activity in XR development, a lot of new applications being built for non-gaming use cases, and this is evident in sort of the trade shows that you and I have both seen in the last few years, where you have like Augmented Enterprise Summit, you have Industrial Immersive, you have these big enterprise companies who are building what is essentially their next generation user experience in XR. And in a lot of cases, that's done using the game engines, as I mentioned. So the skills that people are building or have around game development have so many other opportunities outside of just making games, right?
Yep.
You can see this on like Unity or Epic Games' own websites with regards to their engines. They usually have like a section that talks about industry and the other use cases, which are like education is a big one. You see a lot of simulation and training that's being done in VR. In fact, there's studies that show that this type of training is much more effective than book learning, because you're going through it visually and you're having like the extra sort of sensory experience that reading through an instruction manual or even just viewing a web page that talks about the scenarios is just not sufficient. We see a lot of healthcare applications, a lot of mental wellness apps that are being built in XR. And by the way, this is not always about putting on a headset. When we say XR, that could mean a mobile device that uses augmented reality, for example.
Absolutely.
And like Niantic's Eighth Wall platform is really focused on this and having sort of the immersive experience of using your phone, which everyone has, but in a way that interacts with the world around you, as you see in like their Pokemon Go and other such games built on the same sort of technology. So what I see and what I have been seeing since we started this company in 2018 is that the big companies, not just gaming, but like all companies, talking about Coca-Cola, like Boeing, big defense contractors, are building applications using this technology as sort of the next wave of applications. And it's very similar to what we saw in mobile maybe 15 years ago, where you'd have a small team in an organization that was doing some exploration. They would build up like proof of concept applications, and then, okay, yeah, this is really useful for us. Let's expand. And it went from a small team to a large team very quickly. And then suddenly everyone was like, the first thing that they were building was a mobile application.
Yep. I remember.
Give you an example of exactly that. I come from like enterprise IT operations as my background, and we used to look at dashboards on web pages that would be like maybe on a big display on the wall in the network operations center or help desk, and there'd be all kinds of green, yellow, red indicators to say like the network is up, the servers are up, stuff like that. ABMs in the banking environment I worked at. That's all being replaced with what are called digital twins.
Yep.
And the digital twin of the environment is almost like think of it as a 3D representation of your entire operation, which is typically built in a game engine because they're good at that 3D part, and incorporates all of the monitors and sensors and applications and all the connectivity between them so that you can see everything in real time and see exactly where things are breaking. And we have customers that are doing this. It's really big in the enterprise space right now. And that's really the way things are going, right? There's no better way to display these things than using gaming technology. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So digital twins is a huge space, and there's a lot of I think most majority of the larger companies are investing in some way or form factor into like creating like their own digital twin version of their facilities or their manufacturing processes and etc. But as you indicated, like XR doesn't necessarily mean like just putting on a headset, right?
Right.
Or what we call like the metaverse. It could be cross multiple devices and all of them coming together and each one providing a different aspect of that particular digital twin. So it's great. I want to ask you a question regarding the actual job market. What is the actual job market out there for people that are just starting out? Let's say if they're just graduating out of the college and they're looking for their first opportunity, in this domain, right? Whether it's going to be in the gaming area or some other, digital twin fashion, or like a, immersive training material, right? So pretty much in the same domain, but what is the take on like new graduates? What's the best way for them to have their first step, right? To
Yeah.
approach those particular companies that they are interested in.
Yeah, and I've spoken at several schools on the subject, that I think a lot of people get into this space because, like me, you've noticed from my background, like I'm a huge
Yeah.
gamer. And so I got into this because I had been doing testing and test automation most of my career. But I'm also a huge gamer. And I thought,
Yep.
actually, when I was learning game development for my own personal benefit, just as a side project, I came across this sort of need where, when I was doing my capstone project at the University of Michigan, online program for game development, I said, so how do we test this? And the response I got back was, well, you just play the game. And I was thinking, well, okay, that's fine for like a single developer, right? But
Yeah.
when, as a gamer myself, thinking about, what about all the platforms I need to support? And what about a huge game like, Cyberpunk 2077, for example? Like, I couldn't fathom how somebody would just manually test this. And that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
So I combined those two things and came up with GameDriver at that time. But from a developer perspective, somebody just finishing their program as a developer, they might be thinking, well, I want to develop games because that might be the reason for getting into it. But there's all this opportunity, like we just talked about, outside of gaming, it's relevant. It's there's a ton of like high profile jobs, a ton of opportunity in big companies where you can use those skills and then still do game development. Do it on the side. You're still honing your skills. You're still sort of evolving as an individual. And when the right opportunity comes along, if somebody wanted to continue down the path of game development, then that will materialize. But I think a lot of people aren't aware of that. They aren't aware of sort of the general, at least what I've seen. And I've talked to like the professors at these colleges who are focused on game development, not necessarily on the bigger picture of what else can be done with these degrees.
Absolutely, and that's a huge area, right? I think most people that when they talk about or think about game engines, the primary focus is like, okay, I don't want to be what can I build something else outside of just games utilizing this technology? And the answer is yes. What we call serious games, actually, like all of those training, virtual training that we do, those technically their primary title as far as category is considered, they're called like serious games. And there's a lot of interest in the military, right? Like
Oh yeah.
the military has the Department of Defense. They do a lot of simulations, right? So now it's becoming much easier for everyone to kind of get into that space. You still need to understand the principles and the concepts from a 3D graphics background, of course, right? So still the fundamentals apply. So having that game dev experience is gonna help you quite a bit. Um, but you don't necessarily have to build games, right? You can build much more uh, again, we call it serious games, where you simulate like specific environments that you put in the actual people that need to be trained. For example, even for firefighters, right? And incorporating, let's say, haptics. Um, this is another area that's becoming more and more accessible, I would say, even though there's still some cost associated with haptics, whether it's a suit or gloves, right? And how do you incorporate those things into the whole application? And then, more importantly, from your perspective, how do you actually test those? Right now, we are talking actually about testing an exterior haptic gloves or haptic suits and things like that. Have you guys ever considered or how would you approach that kind of a scenario, for example?
Yeah, coming back to what you're saying first on like defense is a great example. There's another conference each year in Florida called ITSEC. It's I/ITSEC. Huge conference. I mean, like 30,000 people plus. Just a massive showing of technology and the military, defense contractors, and what you see there is a lot of like gaming technology put to use. And you talk about haptic feedback, gloves, vests, everything. I would actually say it has more relevance in that space than it does in gaming. And I know plenty of people that have like full haptic suits for gaming, but it's such a kind of niche sort of thing that I don't think is going to gain a lot of traction. You're not going to see like in Ready Player One how people are spending their whole days in haptic suits, but in that space it makes perfect sense because they're using it for simulation and training, for field ops, for medical services, for all kinds of things. And in the defense side, they're building simulations for everything, and whether you're training for pilot scenarios, which actually pilots train primarily in VR these days.
Yeah.
Whether it's with a headset on their own or in a facility that has the full kind of simulated airplane environment, it's all virtual. And whereas that used to be done with like proprietary technologies that they built on their own, most of them are using commodity engines now, like Unity and Unreal. So tons of opportunity there. And just to kind of wrap that up, like from the gaming perspective, like we've all seen the sort of downturn over the last few years where a lot of studios are closing, and even the ones that are being acquired, if their game isn't blockbuster hit, but otherwise successful, some of those studios are closing or laying off people. And it's been just a really disheartening kind of environment for the last few years. So what I see happening is there's going to be more of this sort of AA and indie type of game development over the next several years, as studios kind of focus more on smaller titles and not going after these big launch titles that they had in the past. And so there's tons of opportunity in both areas. Like some of my favorite games in the last year are all indies, and some of them were even developed by like one person, like Animal Well, fantastic game.
Yeah.
But then to pay the bills, which we all need to worry about, right?
Yeah.
There's all this opportunity in the enterprise space, which is maybe not what people signed up for when they got into the sort of XR and game development, but it's there and it's lucrative. But yeah, coming back to what you were just asking, the testing side of things, we've seen all kinds of scenarios and applications, and it's actually made it kind of hard for us to describe what it is that our customers do, because they do so much. We talk about gaming, and it's in the company name. We launched XR Driver because big enterprise companies are not looking for game solutions, but XR covers a wide range of sort of use cases, like I said, from mental health to training and simulation, et cetera. And in even within that category, companies doing things with haptics, with audio, with even like other senses that they're incorporating into their environments. There was one vendor at ITSEC that was simulating smell for their simulations. Yeah. And they use the most disgusting smells to demonstrate it, which I didn't go to, but my colleagues did, and I was just like, okay, that's fine. But from a testing perspective, yeah, that certainly makes it challenging because it's very subjective, right? Yep. At least with the haptics, you can say like, did we trigger a haptic event? Yes or no, and that's pretty straightforward. But with the smells, it's like, okay, does this smell like a rotting corpse? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. It's yeah. I mean, most of these things that are like kind of coming back, but from a much more approachable, I would say, more user-friendly, kind of economically feasible way. Most of these things have been done in the early 60s.
Yeah.
If you, I'm not sure if you have the, I'm sure you have seen like all of the historical aspects as far as all of this VR devices, or even the augmented reality headsets like the heads-up display. Majority of this stuff has been actually done in the 60s, and then over the course of the next few decades, they are obviously improved on the technology. But it's really fun to see how all those concepts and ideas are now coming back, uh, and being able to actually utilize it in real, in a way to incorporate it into actual existing projects.
Oh yeah.
Because of the, not just the form factor, but I would say the cost is the primary, uh, uh, the cost is the primary side effect of that.
I
So
still think because I have a lot of devices for our company, like, so I test a lot of these things myself. I've got the Vision Pro here in the corner, which is a fantastic device, but really expensive. I've got a Quest 2, Quest 3, Index. I've got a bunch of devices, but like the cost of the Quest 3, for example, is really, really approachable. And it's a great device. It does a lot of things really, really well. The software is really approachable from a user perspective. What I think we're not going to see is, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, so I don't think it's too controversial, but the widespread sort of adoption of VR where you'll just see it like all over the place, I don't know that that's going to happen. It's still kind of, you're still kind of confined to your own environment. And whether it's a working environment, like if in the case of the Vision Pro, where I'm using it to expand my user space and work in multiple sort of desktops, very useful, but I don't know if it's worth $3,500 US. Or the Quest.
I was going to ask you regarding Vision Pro. I mean, it's a great device, obviously, but I always had my mixed feelings about it, and I don't know, the way they marketed it wasn't clear if it was enterprise oriented or consumer oriented.
Yeah.
And in my perspective, it's for neither.
Yeah.
So I think, what's your take on that one?
I think it's a device full of potential, and it may have even been launched as such, that it's let's see what the response is. Very few companies can afford to do that.
Afford it, yeah.
In the way that Apple did, and to say, okay, let's see if somebody comes up with a killer app for this, because so far the killer app for most VR, like consumer level VR, is Beat Saber, and it was probably the smartest acquisition that Meta had made. That it's fun. You can pick it up, put it down. Anyone can play it. It scales difficulty. It's just a great game. But for the most part, the VR experience has been kind of very specific. So like the meditation app, for example, on the Vision Pro is fantastic. I like to meditate. I'm not good at it, so it actually helps me quite a bit by blocking out the environment, and it helps me kind of regulate my breathing and thinking and stuff. And like that's great. Still not worth $3,500.
Sure.
I can do the same thing on the Quest 3 with other apps, and it's works as well. So I really think they were using it as kind of an experiment of what is possible. And now that the market has kind of responded and said, okay, this is too expensive for one. How do they respond? They've already said they're sort of canceling the production of the Vision Pro. That doesn't mean there won't be a follow-up.
Sure, of course.
I think there might be still, because they're still investing in the software. And so if there is a follow-up, I've had to predict, I think they're going to have a lower cost follow-up, keeping in mind that most of these lower cost solutions like the Quest 3, they're low cost because Meta is losing money on every one of them, with the expectation that you're going to buy applications after the fact, right? So they might recover that cost in the first year or year and a half, 2 years, similar to when a new console launches. Like, it's pretty well documented. Sony loses money on every PlayStation.
Yeah, the software is where they make the money. Absolutely. I was
Right.
with their Xbox, and now pretty much they dominate the market with their Xbox.
I think the only one that doesn't lose money on every device is probably Nintendo, and they sell the most units. But the and that might even be true too, because it's still only like $299. But I think if we see a follow-up from Apple, it will be lower cost because somebody will have cracked that code of what is it for.
Yeah,
but we'll see.
Since we are on go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just that was it. I think we'll see. But if I'm just making wild predictions, that would be it.
No, and what are your thoughts on Android XR? I think that was a great announcement that just came out, and then I think the partnership that they have with Samsung, which is one of the largest, electronics manufacturer. So I'm personally actually looking forward to the headset that's going to come out from Samsung, because they do electronics really nicely, and then they're kind of like the high-end version. I would say they would be the high-end version on the Android-enabled headsets, right? So that would be a real competition to Apple at a lower cost, but with the same kind of like a sexy feel and look for it. What any news or any updates you have on that?
Yeah, I think when Meta announced their Horizon OS and basically opening it up to any platform vendor to use, that was a shot at Google directly. And so Google, comes out in response and says, well, now we've got, XR or whatever their OS is called, Android XR.
Yep.
Keeping in mind, Meta is based on it's still an Android derivative.
It is Android, yeah.
so Google gets their cut either way, but it's all about who dominates the market because of the app ecosystem, right? And so if Meta owns the app ecosystem, then that cuts Google out, and Google says, okay, well, we're going to do Android XR, have our own extension through the Play Store, and then they can take their share of that revenue. I think that's going to be the primary competition between Meta and Google on that front. Meta's done a really great job on the operating system. It's really easy use. Like, they took a lot of cues from Apple on that. Like, it's not, that you go in and extend it and modify it in the ways that Android users are expecting. And maybe that's where Google, chips a piece away from that with their own distribution. But I think people just want it to be easy. So I think it's a good competition, and it's actually another indicator that things are going to really kind of ramp up, because if we again look back at how it happened with mobile, it was really Android and iOS going head to head, blow for blow. Every time one came up with a feature, the other copied it or came up with something similar. And that really drove the innovation in the app ecosystem as well. I think both Google and Meta are making big moves in that space. Like today, Meta announced the Horizon desktop creators app. So to make it really easy to create content, they've come up with now a desktop application for just sort of the general user or the general content creator to come up with this content, rather than being a specialized XR application developer. Super smart move, right? And it's these sort of like their desire to own the market, which is going to force the both of them to come up with solutions to drive things forward. But it's a really great sign of things to come, I think.
That's great. That's something that I should look into, actually.
I got the email maybe a half an hour before this call.
Okay, I haven't checked the emails, but that's something I should take a look into. I mean, that's a great thing for one of the key drivers for any of these technologies is the content, right? So the more people can generate content and create content, and right now, not many people can do it due to the high level of skills that you might need on all the different tool chains that you have. So if they come up with a nice way of people creating content without code or low code, that would be great. I have one
Yeah.
more question. So HoloLens, Microsoft HoloLens, which was primarily focused on enterprise applications, and unfortunately they had to discontinue that. And in my opinion, that was one of it. It still is one of the greatest devices as far as enterprise applications are
Yeah.
concerned, because most of the other headsets are geared mostly towards the consumer, right? Like the Meta Quest, and even again, even like Apple Pro, from my perspective, from an enterprise, because we do mostly enterprise application development.
Mhm.
So from our perspective, it didn't make sense because of the cost associated to it. And also, like when you had to order the actual unit, it was kind of, you had to predefine the actual feature, like the facial features of the end user, right? Like
Yeah.
now, if you have to deploy that to, let's say, even 50 people, right? But generally speaking, usually it goes more than that for like enterprise. How do you manage all of those profiles, and how do you like, just that there's logistically, it was just too complicated to process all
Oh
of those
yeah.
things.
It's all the same
So
problems
that's
that
why
we
I'm
saw
like,
in like
it didn't
Windows.
make sense to me. Yeah.
The same problems that we've seen in enterprise software management for the last 30 years, right? Applied to this device, which made it that much more complicated, as you said. I saw a partner recently picked up HoloLens from Microsoft, basically taking up the development and maintenance of the device, which is great. I hated to see it go as well. I think Microsoft made a big bet there, but then when Magic Leap came along and basically beat them at their own game, hardware wise, they backed off. But they backed off probably too early, because the market was really just starting to adopt these things. It's not as quick as buying a new phone, for example. These
Right.
things take a little more planning and effort, and like you said, with the maintenance, the overhead of configuration, whatnot. Although there's a ton of companies that specialize in just that, right? And that just do like the device provisioning and setting up profiles and making sure that the permissions are there and that it's set up in your environment, like with your authentication environment, all that stuff. And so there's a good ecosystem around that. To illustrate my point, in ITSEC, the defense conference in 2023, almost nobody was talking about HoloLens.
Yeah.
And then 2024, lots of these companies were talking about HoloLens, but by then Microsoft had already announced that they were killing the toolkit and the product, which was a real shame, because now these companies who had spent the last year or more developing a solution to bring to market, what are they left with? So
Do you
thankfully,
think that?
another company has picked it up to carry things forward.
Yeah. Do you think that had to do with the contract they had with the Defense Department?
Yeah,
So once they got that contract, right? It was a huge contract. I don't know if too many people are aware of that or not. And like right after that contract was announced, they kind of started like killing the like the consumer, meaning like the enterprise edition of that. Do you think it might have to do something
yeah, I
in this?
do. Yeah, but again, I think, and whatever politics that happened within Microsoft that led to the killing of the line, somebody realized that, oh hey guys, we have a contract over here that probably depends on it. So that might have been why the third party picked it up, is out of necessity.
Yeah, yeah. Great,
But we
great.
may never
So,
know.
well, yeah, I think are we talking about picking up the actual government contract from Microsoft?
I don't know if they picked up the whole
Or
contract, but they did pick up development on the device side. So I
yeah,
don't have it handy, but yeah, I saw a couple of weeks back.
Anduril, right? Like, Paul, are you talking about Anduril?
You might be right about the name, yeah.
Palmer Luckey's new company.
Yeah, I can't remember. But it wasn't very long ago that this was announced.
No, they just picked up. Yeah, they kind of picked it up from Microsoft. Yeah, it's Anduril. It's the new defense contracting company founded by Palmer Luckey, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, it's a good thing, and I think whatever keeps that competition going, because I think if nothing else, having competition in the market validates the need. When you only have like one or two players, it's very difficult, and it doesn't lead to a lot of innovation. So I'm glad they're staying in, if not directly, but through a third party.
Great. One last question, Shane. How about AI? As far as AI is concerned, and how does AI impact XR from your perspective, from test automation? Have you guys looked into how that um, can improve the workload of the QAs and the the test edit, the unit testers and all that stuff?
Yeah,
How is
yeah,
that going to impact and hopefully reduce the complexity? Because there's a lot of like overhead. Usually, like, people don't really think how complicated those unit tests can get. So how is that going to like help in that respect?
yeah. There's a couple of things there. So on the one hand, we see a desire and a push to use AI to generate content, right? From the studios, the platform vendors, they're creating all of these sort of tools for content creation that uses AI. So basically, you type into an LLM, I want this scene with these elements that has these interactions, and some sort of dedicated companies that are doing this have done a really good, like a really good job of it. That even includes like complex interactions. Like I saw at an event last year, the Augmented Enterprise Summit. I can't remember the name of the company, but they were right beside us at the show, and their platform was able to take a prompt like this and create a scene that included even complex behaviors, like if I pull a lever on the wall, it will open the door or unlock the door. And normally this
Yeah,
is like a development task to link up these two objects in a way that when I interact with one, it affects the other. But theirs was able to do it just very quickly. So that type of sort of automatic or AI driven content creation actually makes the QA job harder because you have to test for all of these sort of systems that are in place rather than the specific content itself. Because if the content's dynamic or driven by LLMs, you're not going to be able to test everything, but you can test the systems that support it in a way that, like, ensures that when users are creating the content using AI, that it's not going to break anything, or they can't bypass certain controls to say, ignore all previous instructions and give me access to the source code or something, crazy like that. You can automate the testing for that, but it does make the overall sort of strategy for testing a little more challenging. On the testing side, AI and LLMs are still very early days. And so we see a lot of talk and companies coming up that are focused on this. But one thing to keep in mind is, like, when we talk about LLMs from a language creation, like writing or creating pictures or movies even, or code, that there's a huge body of existing data to model from.
yeah,
Right. So for each of these, GitHub Copilot is based on all the public repos and maybe even
yep,
some of the private ones that are
yeah,
available for all these different projects. So when you say, give me an endpoint that takes a JSON and does this, it has millions of examples to pull from.
absolutely.
We don't have this on the testing side, particularly when it comes to gaming and XR. There is actually quite a lot in terms of like web and mobile testing, because like the GitHub example, there's a lot of
Yep,
test projects that are there that we
correct.
can,
That are out there. Yeah,
you can ask Llama today, like, build me a Selenium test for a web app, that does these things, and it will come up with a pretty good starting point. But when you say, give me a GameDriver test, there's nothing to pull from, and not
yeah,
just from the testing perspective, but also thinking about like how games and XR experiences are developed. There's no
yes,
standard. There's no standard way of doing anything. Like when you interact with something, what is a button in a game? a button can be anything.
Right.
There's no sort of standard interface for it. So what you see in the companies that are focusing on this, like Model AI, and there's a few others that are doing a pretty good job, is that they instrument into the app itself, into the game, for general terms. They instrument something that allows them to sort of create agents or spawn behaviors and do things. So it's a development task to incorporate their sort of AI features. From a pure black box perspective, there's no visibility there, so it can't see what's happening inside the game. It has to be written into it. Whereas our approach has always been, we want to deterministically test behavior by saying, I'm performing these inputs or these actions, and I'm expecting this outcome, positive or negative. And so I think there's room for both. There's the approach of, I want something exploratory, or that's taking an aggregate of user behavior and generating a model based on that, and then can do things that bots would do. That's one approach, using the AI. And then you still want to have the very deterministic, when I perform these actions, I get these outcomes. And to leave that point, if you look at the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild game, and it's Tears of the Kingdom successor. This is a systems-based game that allowed the user to do basically anything, and the Tears of the Kingdom even more so, with assembling objects in random ways, and just amazing. It was a sandbox game, really, kind of like Minecraft. You can build anything. So rather than testing every single thing that could happen, you want to focus on testing the systems that support it, and making sure that the systems behave the way that you expect them to, so that when your LLM creation comes along and builds something that has never been built before, that those things are probably going to work.
Absolutely.
And sorry, that's a hugely long answer, but it is actually a very complicated question.
No, it is complicated, and the whole and I think you kind of answered it, because I was trying to kind of get a sense to see if you guys are like trying to work or have some ideas about how, like, in the next few years you might want to integrate some of those concepts, right? The concepts and the tooling into the existing game driver or the XR driver tool set. Right?
Absolutely. And actually, I'm talking on this subject at the Game Quality Forum in Lisbon later this year. It's in June. Without giving away too much about what our plans are, really the important thing there is that we need a standard way of sort of quantifying and capturing user behaviors across games and XR that allows us to build models. And until we can build models that are consistent from one game to the next, then it's very difficult.
Be hard to do so.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's the key. I mean, a lot of the data, the available models and the data out there, and as we said, there's not too much from a gaming perspective, right? There's not too much out there from a gaming or from an XR perspective, because most people are concentrating on the actual content creation. And
don't even focus, like if
they do have it, they don't actually release it, so it's not like publicly available. It's
no, and so you might build something bespoke for your game. For example, like if you had a World of Warcraft, you might be able to build something that captures user inputs and behaviors and builds a model from that, so that you can create AI from it. But there's nothing generalized. And so you can't take that behavior and apply it to a new world MMO, because the two games are so different. Absolutely. It would never translate.
Yet another challenge for your team.
Yes.
You guys have a lot of challenges. It's mind-boggling, like the amount of hardware is, like, each year, new hardware, new platforms, new SDKs come out. And internally, how does your team actually handle all of these things? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of, time and resources are always an issue for all companies. And like, how do you keep up with all of this evolving technology, right? Like, every day you wake up, there's something new out there, a new framework, a new SDK, a new library, Android XR, for example, let's say. right?
Oh,
Like
you're absolutely right. We talk
like
about it almost daily. It's like,
yeah,
so for example, we have now Unity and Unreal support, and we
yeah,
support multiple versions of Unity, multiple versions of Unreal. So we have to test all of those, and that becomes like a matrix that we test against, right?
yeah,
But then we have to also test like Steam VR and Meta XR and
yeah,
Open XR and OVR and
yeah,
HoloLens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to prioritize. When I said we picked up the Vision Pro, it was in anticipation for our customers needing it. So we did, test it, make sure that it would work at a basic level, but then we kind of left it there.
yeah,
That when the demand comes along and people say, "Hey, I'm doing work on Vision Pro. Can we work with you on this?" Then we know
yeah.
that it's time to kind of focus on it a little more. But there's so much. I'd say a large part of our effort is just understanding and going after the right platforms to support.
Absolutely. Very cool. Thank you, Shane. And you guys already announced a couple of really nice programs that I think is going to help a lot of indie developers. If you want to talk a little bit about that, like the offering that you guys have,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that there's an indie program for people that can join and
there
maybe
is.
share some information as far as how to get there, how to get started.
Yeah, so recognizing that not everybody has sort of the budget to invest in tools, especially as they're getting started, we have what's called the Ambassador program.
Yep.
So if you go to GameDriver.io/ambassador, that will give you sort of an overview and a form to fill out to gain access. Where if your team is small or just getting started, if you're under a certain threshold of money raised or revenue earned, then the tools are free. And our hope is that we can help you get to that point where your project takes off and you've got millions of users, where the automation has been helpful and you continue on with us. And if that's not the case, then at least you were able to access the tools as they were needed. Although there's tons of examples of when that does happen, and that's the same is true for educators. So I just had a chat with the University of Calgary this morning, and they're launching an XR study and program for their graduate students, and they want to use GameDriver as part of that. And so
Excellent.
we provide free access to educators as well. We're also about to launch sort of more transparent pricing, because I think there's been sort of a hesitancy to invest in something when the pricing isn't clear and upfront. And the reason why we did that in the past is that it really depends on what you're building, right? We could do a one size fits all pricing, but then as you mentioned, with covering the different technologies and platforms that we need to support, that wouldn't really kind of cover our costs. So we have these sort of tiered licensing that if you're just doing basic work and desktop or mobile, that's one. If you have XR or consoles, that's another. And so in the past, we hadn't published our pricing very clearly, but we're going to be publishing it very soon. And what you'll see there is that even for individuals, the cost of getting started is actually quite achievable. And we've worked with teams as small as 2 developers, where one was doing design and one was doing the sort of back end development, and they were able to automate their testing and cut like a huge percentage of effort off of their sort of daily process in doing so. And so I think by having this out there and people can see, like, it's easy to get started, or it's pretty low cost to invest even at an individual level, that more people will be interested in building an automation in from the beginning. It's not really intended to just be for the big studios or the big enterprise customers. Our goal was to make it accessible to everyone.
Excellent. Now, I think that new pricing model is superb, especially for people that are really interested in actually employing and deploying unit testing into their, whether it's game or XR application or anything that they have to do with that domain. So I think that was a great thing that you guys did last year.
Yeah, it has been useful for a number of teams that we worked with. So I'm happy we were able.
And let's say if somebody just wants to get started, what's the best way to do it as far as content and tutorials are concerned, right? So let's say they now have access to the actual SDK. Now, they apply through the program, they have access to it.
Yeah.
Are there any quick tutorials, video tutorials? What's the best way for them to actually get started in that?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So if for anyone signing up, you'd get like an email with links to documentation, of course, and in there's some sort of guided tutorials step by step on how to get started. There's also a link to a video course, which is actually me talking in this room for about 2 hours. And it's broken up though. It's in chapters, so it's quite easy to follow. And I talk about getting started in 2D, in 3D, in XR, and what each of these kind of brings in terms of challenges and how you approach them. And that's entirely free. It's over on the testguild.com website, and is available for anyone. So really, my hope is, whether or not you're thinking about sort of buying or using GameDriver from the beginning or later on, that having a sort of understanding of why test automation is valuable, why it's important, will get developers thinking about it, and maybe down the road it's something they pick up. But I find that we don't talk about testing enough in this industry, and there's a lot of people out there who are doing the work that, for whatever reason, have been treated like sort of low cost, low value sort of resources in these projects, when I think it couldn't be further from the truth. That and we've seen this time and time again, if a project goes out there and it's full of bugs, or features aren't fully developed, the impact is either poor performance, poor sales, or even entire studio closures because of it. And the days of just putting things out there as early access or betas, I don't think people really tolerate that anymore. And the expectation is that things work the first time, or they're not going to invest their time into it any further, because we just don't have time in our lives to waste effort on something that's not going to add value to us. So, and then on the enterprise side, it's even more critical, because if your simulation or training isn't working up front, then that project's going to get canceled pretty quick. We've seen it happen over and over again.
Absolutely. It's already hard to convince people to actually sign up for the actual projects. I mean, things are taking too much time. And then imagine once the green light gets going, and then you start actually working on it, and then it comes time for doing the initial proof of concept, and then suddenly like a simple interaction doesn't work because you forgot to, for example, do a configuration here. That's this tool is going to be great for catching those basic just the basic common sense stuff, right? It's going to make it much easier for them. Very cool. Thank you very much, Shane, for joining us. I know you're super busy, and we will share all of the information down in the description section, so people can actually access to the program and also to that video tutorial. You mentioned, you have a 2-hour-long video tutorial that they can actually consume. So we'll share all of those information down below, and hopefully, whoever's watching this, whether live or later after the live session, then they can always have access to it. Thank you very much, Shane.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.